Welcome everyone to the Stoa. It's pretty wild here in Toronto right now with the snow today and lots of energy in the collective field. So I hope everyone is safe and sound. And if you're here now, you probably just watched the premiere of a film, Initiation to Game B, on the Stoa's YouTube channel. And this was a film that was written, directed, and animated by Jake Ruiz, who's here today, and produced by Jim Rutt, Jeff Gomez, and Jake, all of who are here today. So I'm going to take in Jim in a moment, but how today's going to work is Jim is going to talk to the three J's who created this film. They're going to have a quick discussion about the film, and then Jim's going to take me back in. And then I'll introduce the epic Dialogos panel that we have today that includes Jim, Jordan Hall, and Tyson Yunkaporta, and Daniel Schmachtenberger. And they'll be talking for about 45, 60 minutes, and then maybe we'll have some time for some questions. So if you have questions anytime during the panel talk, just put in the chat, and then if we have time, I'll call on you. You can unmute yourself, and you can ask your question to the panel. So that being said, I got to give Jim unmute access. Jim, you're up, my friend.
All righty, thanks, Peter. Thanks a lot for putting this together. Yeah, this is very exciting. This been a lot of work from a lot of folks to get us to this moment. I thought I'd start out with just a little bit of history of the project. It started out, I don't know, a little over 2 years ago on the Game B group site on Facebook, I believe. There was some talk, hey, you know, we need to move out of the word of just words and get our word out in art. You know, art speaks to a different part of the brain. I said, well, you know, I'm a word dude, you know, my art, I'm about as good as art as nobody you've ever met. My high art form might be a construction pencil on a grocery bag to design a deer stand or something like that. So I started putting feelers out and saying, hey, anybody working on art in the Game B space, and chatted to a couple people, nothing really clicked. And then Jake Ruiz reached out directly to me, and you know, I don't even know if he knew I was looking. Did you know I was looking, Jake? Nope. He said, I got an idea. And we had a convo, as I do all the time with folks, and we really clicked. And I said, wow, I really like this guy's vision. Let's see where it goes. And so we started a process, which took a while, and eventually resulted in this movie. So let me, this film, I guess, Jake always bashes me whenever I say movie. He says, you know, that's, you know, cheesy old people say that. You know, this is a film. So yes, so now we're ready to launch our film here. So let me introduce the other two J's. Jake, I call our principal filmmaker. He runs a creative agency, Futurity, that utilizes an integral methodology to align organizations to their purpose and design. And he designs content for effective transmedia communication strategies. Our other J is Jeff Gomez. He's been exceedingly helpful. I refer to him as our narrative guru. Jeff's the CEO of Starlight Runner, which is recognized as a premier consultant in the fields of brand narratives, story world development, creative franchise design, and transmedia storytelling. We're amazingly lucky to have a dude of the punching power of Jeff on our project. So, and I guess I'm the third J, and I'm kind of the head janitor of the Game B movement. It's about all I could say. So with that, you know, I'd like to turn it over to Jake to talk a little bit about the process and, you know, how he went about it and all the things that were, not all the things, some of the things that were involved.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, Jake here. Peter, it's a great honor. Thank you for hosting the film here and holding this event with all the Game B OGs present. The sheer amount of sagely wisdom in this room will surely break something, right? And I'd especially like to thank our executive producers, the Rutt family, aka the Medicis of Game B. So, you know, every artist needs a muse, right? And perhaps our old muses like secular individualism have aged and withered and need to be put to rest. For me, as a protopian vision, Game B is like a sexy person who's always walking ahead of you into the future. They'll always have their issues, but day by day, they encourage you to transform your head, heart, and body and be more of a team player. So my hope for this film is simply that it will encourage artists who create anything from memes to speculative dreams, that their vision, to share their vision with Game B, of Game B, a future that they'd feel a little more proud to leave their descendants. And we'll keep iterating together until we accelerate the exodus out of Game A. I won't talk too much about the process. I want to give the panelists the time here. So with that, I'll introduce the Master of Transmedia, Mr. Jeff Gomez.
You're on mute there, Jeff.
Right. How about that?
There we go.
Okay. Well, people, it's so fantastic to be here. This is the realization of a little tiny dream I've had since first hearing the term Game B from Jordan Hall. This was some years ago. And being so privileged to be able to sit in on these talks, these discussions, and learn that there were people all over the world who were thinking about the systemic crises that we face as a human race, and as custodians to the earth, that people were actually thinking about solutions that were systemic, a systemic approach to solving these problems was astonishing. Astonishing because I come from the realms of fantasy and science fiction. So the only way that myself and people of my background have had to communicate such ideas was through, science fiction. And here we are, sitting, talking to each other about real world solutions to these problems. Now, I have to admit, sometimes I would sit on these conversations and not understand what the hell you were talking about. It can be dense. The language can be, rarefied, and yet the fact that people like me can have access to this. To this, the very nature of what Game B is about is the ability for us to mix and match our skills and our perspectives to come up with unexpected answers. So I began to implore Jordan and Daniel Schmachtenberger and Jim Rutt, can't we find ways to communicate these ideas to the people, to the population? I'm from a background that's used to placing a megaphone in front of popular storytellers. Why can't I apply those skills to get some consensus of what Game B is, and help to feed it to an artist like Jake, or a team like Jake, Jim, and myself, and come up with something that distills some of these basic concepts. And so we got together and then asked some of you some questions, and we compiled, I think, a list of wonderful traits, some of which made it into this animated film. So I'm really proud of the journey that we made. I think it's wonderful, and I'm very interested in what everyone here has to say about it. I'm also interested in, of course, spreading the word, showing others, and interpreting the film for others, so that we could actually, start answering some of these fundamental questions.
Very good. I'd also like to just mention that we had a lot of help from what we called our editorial advisors, number of people that have been in and around the Game Bee world for quite a while. And I'm just going to read them off. Jordan Hall, Daniel Schmachtenberger, Tyson Yunkaporta, Nora Bateson, Zach Stein, Brett Weinstein, Mark Allen Kaplan, Alexander Beiner, Peter Wang, Mick Rocks, Vel von Horn, Bruce Kunkel, Sharon Lewis, Nicholas Limbacher, and Ellie Hain, all of whom had some input into the project. Many of whom were interviewed in depth by Jake and Jeff. And this film wouldn't be what it was without them, though, of course, as always, all faults and errors are ours.
All right, you ready, Jim?
I am ready. So let me introduce the three folks that will be joining me on the panel. First, Jordan Hall. He and I have been working on what eventually became Game Bee since back in 2008, I believe, a long time ago. And he's the co-founder of the Civium Project and an intrepid explorer into the deep code of civilization, design, and dynamics. And always good for a very interesting and deep conversation. Tyson Yunkaporta is a senior lecturer in Indigenous knowledge at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia. He's a member of the Appalach clan in far north Queensland, and he carves traditional tools and weapons. He is also the author of what I consider one of the best books of the last few years and an indispensable read for anybody in Game Bee land, and that's Sand Talk. If you haven't read it, read it. Daniel Schmachtenberger is a founding member of the Consilience Project, aimed at improving public sense-making and dialogue. The through line of his interests has been with ways of improving the health and development of individuals and societies with a virtuous relationship between the two as a goal. So that be us. Let's take it away. The question that we put to the panel, and we'll start with the question. Actually, I'll ask the panelists to give a short take on what they thought of the movie, say no more than a minute, and then speak to the role of the arts in the unfolding of Game Bee. And then after each of us has our chance at the question, we'll have a general discussion about what's going on in and around the Game Bee world. So Jordan, why don't you go first?
And if I just jump in before Jordan, if everyone could, besides the panelists, just shut their camera off, that helps the YouTube video pick it up and create some intimacy. When the Dialogos is over, I'll jump in, turn on my camera, and then we'll pivot to Q&A. So off you go, Jordan.
I was going to punt into the other panelists under the premise that I was going to be the craziest one, and then I realized who else was on the panel. So sorry, you're just stuck. Okay, so maybe let me work backwards on the last piece because it made me laugh a little bit. I have been on and on in that sense, like rambling on about this notion of art for the past maybe 2 months or so, with the mindset of saying we typically get very stuck, I think, in the way something has shown up in sort of our memory or our life experience. So the notion of art in our world, in the world that most of us are familiar with, perhaps not everybody here, oftentimes is identified with what I would just call artifacts. So stuff made out of stuff, oftentimes in shapes or colors, paintings and statues, but also music, but it's that kind of thing, the stuff that the Greek sensibilities of the muses. But my sense of it is that that's not really what art is. It's art, it's how art has shown up. And that rather the notion of art has to do with the particular capacity to express by means of access to what Forrest Landry would refer to as the transcendent. So that there is a way of navigating the world that is governed by certain rules of mind, right? So for example, logic, etc. And there's a way of navigating the world governed by a different set of rules. And you might call those transcendent rules, the rules of feeling or of quality, or vibes if you're Gen Z. And I would say that that simply is art. Art is the actual capacity to navigate the world by means of this other modality. And I would propose that the shifting into, or in some sense, the return, the remembering of how to live life artfully is in much the essence of this concept of game B, right? To move from a way of living life effectively or in an optimizing way, which is very much of the essence of game A, moving into living life artfully in this modality is very much of the essence of game B, or at least of the transition. In the context of the, the film, or the, what would you call it, digital animated short, I suppose, if we want to be pedantic, Evan. As we know, any given expression is going to be what it is. So it captures what it can capture, expresses what it can express. And what I noticed when I watched it, and more importantly, actually, when I watched it with my daughter, who's 3, was that it conveyed certain feelings that seemed to be what I would say right or in alignment, meaning I felt a feeling in my heart when the heart feeling was being called. And more importantly, again, my daughter seemed to. She reacted to it in a very particular way, and she was asking a bunch of questions. She was very curious about what was going on. I would say, by the way, that what seemed to be the most powerful thing for her was the girl in the beginning and the girl in the end, and the realization that that girl was a human, and then noticing this other place that was pretend, and what it was like to feel the relationship between the human and the pretend. So it's interesting, right? One of the things that happens when you're interacting with things in the artistic is it's open. You know, people will begin to dig into it in ways that are, well, not only not obvious, but in not necessarily at all with respect to what the explicit intent or the mental notion of the artist would be. And it's the invitation into the inquiry that to me is more important. Like the content is nice, the content is good. I told Jeff I was surprised that Jim let it actually show up the way that it showed up. But the context and the degree to which it invites people into a certain kind of inquiry and a certain relationship with disposition, I think that's nice. That's a good direction.
Okay, Tyson, let's hear your take.
Well, everyone I showed it to, my family and everything, they're just like punch in the air and say, yeah, that's it. I think, when you're preaching to the choir, people are going to love it. I haven't tried it out yet on anybody who isn't already across all of the concepts in it, and see, this was my main criticism of it was, it's an initiation, but there's no ordeal. But then I figured, no, there's no ordeal because I already know what's in it, and the people I showed already know what's in it, so they didn't feel a fear and danger response. So there was no ordeal to go through. But I imagine if someone's never come across those concepts before, that would be something of an ordeal and a bit of a shock to the limbic system. That'll give them a bit of a jolt. So yeah, that's okay. And I guess, for a lot of people, I don't know, I don't think everyone in the world's going to see it. But I think if it really took off, I think the main responses that you're going to get will be negative, is like, well, Game B is all pale male, stale, non-Indigenous, able-bodied dudes. And, why do they have all these female and Indigenous and people of color and Eastern or whatever avatars, and I don't know. So there'll be like representation concerns. But I think anyone coming from that point of view, if they had that view of history, I think if they really thought it through, then they might arrive at the conclusion of, well, it's appropriate that's the demographic of the majority of Game B, because you made the mess, so you clean it up, kind of thing. I think that would be a more helpful critique. I certainly haven't got a problem with with that demographic in Game B. I think it's highly appropriate. I think the people who understand the structure best are the people who made it. you know, just as you, Jim, you understand the internet pretty well because you're one of the senior elders and founding fathers of the internet from my point of view, because you've been around there for forever. And yeah, I think that's the way. I think it's very appropriate. The demographics of Game B, but then at the same time, it's going to be really important to get. I think, you know, to achieve the goals of Game B, to have a nice some bigger front doors and bringing all kinds of people in, and I think that's where the arts side of thing is going to do it. And I sort of see I see the film as a good little leverage point for making that happen. Looking forward to seeing it happen.
Thanks, Tyson. Daniel.
I think the thing about the film that I liked the most, there was a lot of content in it that was good. It was a trippy experience because I didn't even know that it was happening until you sent it to me to watch. I think I had missed my emails updating. So it was trippy to like see all of the content that we've talked about put forward in a form like that for the first time. But I think the thing that I'm happiest about is just that an investment into other media and forms of communication and starting to think about artistic presentation is happening at all. And the main thing I would hope is that it just inspires a lot more endeavors of totally different kinds. Someone said in here, one of the things they preferred aesthetically about solar punk was more focus on the arts. I think that is an area that has been deficient in some way in our kind of thinking and community so far. So I'm happy to see that. And I think the question was asked, like, what is the role of art in Game B? I think it's a really good question. And I'll just say the first couple of thoughts that came to mind. The first time I went to Bali, someone was telling me that an idea from the kind of ancient Balinese culture is that they said the art museum is the sign of a dead culture that has relegated art to a place. And that if a culture is not dead, the entire civilization should be the art museum. Humans should not build anything that isn't art. And that they had this idea that nature is beautiful enough that we should only build something if it adds to the beauty of nature. And that was actually core to their thinking. And that when you look at the temples and the streets, there's this idea that anywhere the eye falls or anything that lands on the ears elevates consciousness, that everything is art in a way that is consciousness elevating. And when we realize that technology is not values agnostic, that technology has inexorable effects on us, it codes for patterns of behavior that affect us like that, the kind of ontologic design movement of how do we rebuild the human-built world, not just for the specific functional purposes, but to elevate, develop, and enlighten the people and the relationships within it, then art takes on a very central theme, right? Like how would, if we thought about everything in the built world, how it lands on all of our senses, having an elevating effect on consciousness, I think that's a very interesting kind of artistic Renaissance perspective for Game B. I was thinking about from, the Greek true, good, and beautiful triad. There was a poem I wrote on her birthday to an artist friend of mine once, where I said something like, the truth and goodness only matter because beauty is. And it was kind of an exploration of, like, if reality was not inherently beautiful in a beyond visual sense, but like beauty is the sense, it's like the embodied sense of the inherent meaningfulness of it, I wouldn't give a shit about goodness. I wouldn't give a shit about truth. Like, I only actually even care to understand it, and I care to serve it, the true and the good, because there's this inherent beauty in it. And I was noticing how much truth and goodness were inherent to my pursuits, and yet it's all in service to the things that I see in people who live artfully. And then I think just the last thing I'll say there is a pretty simple distillation of maybe everything that I have learned regarding how to live a meaningful human life. Everything of being, doing, and becoming all kind of synthesizes down to appreciate the beauty of life, add to the beauty of life, develop your capacity to do both. And that the mode of being in its depth is really appreciating the beauty of existence as it is, being able to take it in, be moved by it, be raptured by it. And that then the protective impulse and the creative impulse in their deepest sense, the doing is the add to the beauty of life. And if what you're creating is not adding to the beauty of life in the way the Balinese said, then it's not the right thing to do. And the mode of becoming, the human development, is really deepen your capacity for being, to appreciate and be with reality more, and to add to the beauty of it more. And the recursive relationship between those three doesn't really leave anything that I care about out. And so if I was going to kind of define the superstructure of game B, I think that would be a decent starting place.
Cool. Thank you, Daniel. Now, on my take on it, it's, Jordan was saying, hey, surprise, Jim, let this thing out. Well, I wouldn't have put quite the same emphases and weights and things on the various elements in the film, but that's not what art's about, right? Art's about getting you in the heart. And there's not a thing in the film that I disagree with. As I said, I would emphasize different things, but it struck me that the right thing to do was to let Jake resonate with his artistic vision. And I was supportive of that throughout. And I think that's really, really important. Because to the degree that art becomes didactic, it becomes propaganda and it's no longer art, right? So if we're going to have an art scene around game B, we have to let the artists be the artists. I think that's sort of just fundamental, and not think of it as a branch of didactic instruction. Now, of course, there may be some things that are didactic instruction, which includes some arts, but that's not the same as a work of art. And so I'm very, very happy the way this thing has turned out as what I truly believe it to be, which is a work of art from the artistic vision, principally of Jake, with a little bit of contribution from the rest of us. In terms of the role of the arts in Game B, one of my day jobs, to the degree I have one, is the study of cognitive science. And part of that goes into the study of personalities and learning and memory. And one of the things that you learn when you start studying how that thing between our ears works is there's a lot of difference amongst people in how their minds work. There are some people who are very good at syllogisms and writing things down carefully and reading closely and being able to regurgitate it on standardized tests, etc. And then there are other people who are not. And some of those are some of the most brilliant and effective people I've ever met, who experience the world experientially, who are saturated in it. And to my mind, for historical and accidental reasons, Game B was way overloaded with that first class of folks, right? Some of the early discussions, nerd fests of transcendental proportions, right? The writing we did on some of our projects together, group writing, was phenomenal, but it was because we were those kinds of folks. And actually, it turned out to be important because I think it's built us a very deep base. People sometimes will compare and contrast us with other Game B adjacent movements. And I say that's good because there are many, many people on this mission together. And some of them have a more artistic temperament than we have so far. But I am pretty proud of the deep, deep digging that we have done over the last, 8 years or so, almost 9 years now. I guess 10 years will be coming up in March, actually, from the very earliest work. But this syllogistic, logical approach is not how you get the word out to the world. And so while we'll continue to dig, and still a lot more digging to do and a lot more intricate work to do in protocols and designs of various aspects, governance systems, software, et cetera, the time has come to turn and tell the story in ways that the people who interact with the world experientially can engage with. And to my mind, that is really the role of art. And of course, even for those of us who, to use a horrible popular cultural cliche, are more left-brained, don't believe that left-brain, right-brain stuff, by the way, because it's, well, there's just sort of a little hint of something to it. It's not nearly as black and white as people say, but let's use it anyway. Us more left-brain people, I think, will have our own understanding of our own work will expand tremendously when we get exposed to artistic reflections, essentially, of this work, and will allow the work of digging to go off in whole new directions that we never would have seen. I got to say, I mean, this film has caused me to think about the journey to Game B quite differently. And for many other people who are, you know, I still recall in our early Game B days, there were some members who were probably more of this other tribe who complained that our online world was a wall of words, right? And I go, well, what do you expect? Yeah, it's a bunch of words. Yeah, that's what we're doing here. Well, you know what? That was stupid of me, because there were a lot of really valuable folks who could have contributed a lot more if, instead of it just being a wall of words, we had also included you know, some more artistic and aesthetic sensibilities. And so I see that also as the role of the arts in Game B. You know, I hope this is just the very first. It's not the first. There have been people that have created Game B poems and you know, a little bit of music and such, but not very much. And I hope this is the beginning, a little pebble rolling down the hill that starts an avalanche and sees the deep hole of the deep work of the deep code, to steal Jordan's phrase, of construction and logic and syllogisms and writing to be a base from which the artistic representation of this new world that we hope to see come into existence can take fire and just start growing exponentially. Back to you, Peter.
I was just sensing you four have a conversation for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Open.
Sweet. We can just riff.
Yeah, have at it, gentlemen.
I think art has to be emergent, and it has to come from those liminal sort of places. And I think if it's not, then it's just propaganda. And I feel like Game B's resisted the propaganda side of things really quite admirably so far. And yeah, I feel like this one hasn't sort of dropped straight out of the center of things, but it's kind of emerged a bit. And yeah, I'd like to see more of that too. If no one's jumping in, like Jordan said something to me about the last week or week before. It was about it's really stuck with me. It's about being a Game B loser in Game A, which is really cool. So I've looked at myself and gone, oh man, I'm a Game B loser in Game A, like especially on this continent that's currently called Australia. However, Daniel, if I go to Bali, which it's cheaper for me to fly to Bali than it is to fly home on this continent, and suddenly I'm a Game A winner in a place that was formerly arguably already Game B, because I can just stretch out my hideous fat body on the beach and get some young girl to give me a massage for like 2 hours for $5 or something. So that makes me a Game A winner in in a Game B place. So I guess context is everything, isn't it? But while I'm here, Game B loser in Game A. I think Jordan's talking.
Sorry, I was on mute. We're trying to figure out how to thread the needle, or to go through the eye of the needle, if you like that metaphor, of figuring out how to be a Game B winner in Game B. And of course, it's not easy. One of the things that we ran into a lot back in the pre-spore mode days was the challenge of actually recognizing, like really deeply recognizing the necessity of the vulnerability of the immaturity of Game B. You know, oftentimes there was a desire to be able to sort of specify something and specify something that was, I think, good, but then try to get there by using the tools of Game A, including the mindset of Game A. And so and that doesn't work. That's the precise thing that can't work. It's what gets things in, it turns art back into propaganda right quick. And so being able to actually really, really gently hold each of those pieces and learn how to have the sensitivity to know precisely when you're doing it right, which I would say, by the way, to throw a lot of problem into this conversation would be to rediscover the notion of the sacred, like what it means to actually be able to treat with care the things that need to be held carefully, was a big part of the learning. And maybe that's another way of describing the notion of art, to say that art is more like midwifery, which means more like learning how to treat with care that which needs to be treated carefully, which is in the process of bringing itself into the world. And you happen to be a steward, or a custodian, helping it come in.
Tyson, I was just thinking of what you said about that arguably Bali might have been more gamey historically. And as you mentioned, the continent now called Australia, that it might have been more gamey previously. And you having a mindset, a heart set, a way of being or orientation that might be more gamey from those roots that still has you a gamey loser. I've never thought about it this way before, so this might not be right. It's just a thought that's coming up in the moment. Is one way of maybe thinking about game A versus game B is that game A is defined, at least largely, by inexorability arguments. That's the nature of the multipolar trap. That's the nature of the arms race, the tragedy of the commons and Moloch, and the need to keep up with competing OODA loops. Is our game B civilization is going to get fucking killed by those guys, and so we have to get better at warfare than them or die. And if the Spartans are putting all their energy into warfare and we put any of our energy into arts, we're going to fucking die, right? So you either have to beat the most successfully extractive and violent at extraction and violence, or get beaten by them. So what happens to art and culture and anything else? And so there's a certain kind of inexorability argument in that, right? You take somebody as considerate as Einstein, and the Einstein-Szilard letter is what got the US to start the Manhattan Project, because the inexorability of otherwise the Germans are going to. And so, but what's interesting is that inexorability arguments are fundamentally antithetical to the nature of choice, like any kind of authenticity of freedom. And one could say that maybe game B is something that is rooted in the reality of the nature of choice, and that fundamentally seeks to protect and uphold it. And yet, obviously, it still has to deal with inexorabilities. And so this is something that we've talked about, of how do you make something that doesn't lose at game A while not also converging to winning at game A. Because if it loses at game A, it's not game B, it's just a cul-de-sac. But if its way to not lose is to just also be game A, it's also a cul-de-sac. And so the threading of the needle is something that, and so fundamentally what it's saying is that the inexorability is a fully causal thing. Because of X, Y must be, otherwise Y is overcome by X. So what it's saying is a way of working with the field of choice that is actually more effective than purely the domain of causation. And then I would say, as far as this conversation, more effective and also more beautiful. Just a thought that came up as you were describing that history.
Yeah, I think I was thinking it. I hadn't thought of Bali as being game B before, but I guess if you the way you were talking about the built environment sounds very game B. It sounds like something that game B is aspiring towards. But yeah, of course, I'm aware of the the game theory side of things, and that idea that the seed of game A was there in ancient societies. However, it wasn't a problem until things started to scale. I think I've heard your story about the plow before being the turning point for that as well, which is pretty cool. Yeah, but I don't know. They had plows. Look, we used to trade with them. like for about a millennium ago. We were trading with the Macassans. So, most of what I know about their prehistory is through that trade and through the law that we have, passed right across around the continent, about what those people were like before. And they were very different, because they were mining, they were doing all kinds of things like, so that they brought steel here. So we had things like machetes and anchors and stuff like that, for a few centuries before things changed here. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna speak to what Daniel was talking about this great conundrum. And I'll call it the great conundrum. And I will be the first to admit, we don't yet have the answer, which is, how do we build game B, stay true to game B values, not be co-opted, and at the same time, not be crushed by game A? This is one of the many riddles that we have to solve, and we have just the most rudimentary ideas on how to do it. And I think it's going to be one of the key parts of our work going forward. The phrase I like to use is, how can we build game B while simultaneously parasitizing game A, which is to build membranes, build bubbles of B-ness where people can actually live a true and authentic game B life, mostly, while at the same time creating things of value to people over in game A and trading with them on terms that actually work for us. And obviously you can think of the potential coordination issues. What happens if game B membranes, proto-Bs, civiums start, thinking that their status comes from how many shekels they stack up that they've pulled in from game A. That's a failure mode, right? On the other hand, if they don't pull in enough to keep themselves going and to defend themselves in legal and political and, if necessary, kinetic terms, then they also fail. So this is going to be a very interesting and difficult balancing act. And I think that these are high dimensional complex systems problems, which we know are not actually tractable to analytical solutions. You can't actually do the math and say, this is how game B parasitizes game A and remains true to itself. So I think this is where art can essentially be a tuning mechanism. As we start to confront these issues, people will see, artists, people who know how to speak from the heart, will start to see these conflicts and potential compromises, and will, through art, put out things that remind us that that we have to be true, and we have to somehow thread this needle. And this is not the only such very difficult transition we're going to have to go through to really bring a game B world into being. And it sort of at least makes some sense to me that our artists can be represent much bigger, higher dimensional possible ways of thinking about these problems than can logic and syllogisms. And if we resonate with those and with some discernment amongst those, it may help us collectively organize as we try to work out these solutions to what seem from here to be really difficult problems.
I think on the staying true side, I think that's why you got your Stoics in here. It's the thing I like about game B is I reckon it's the Stoics that make it work, because you just can't bullshit around them. So I know there's a tendency in me to do that sense maker guru kind of thing where I can just kind of let myself off the hook. I can go, oh, I've only got like 12 peer-reviewed publications and most of those are co-authored. That's not because I'm a crappy scholar. That must be because I'm being persecuted for speaking the truth. And the system doesn't listen to me, and then I can signal out to all these sort of disgruntled sort of people out there and get massive audiences and all that sort of thing. A lot of your sense maker gurus go that way, but I find that Game B is a really calm place where that doesn't happen, and I think it's because of all the Stoics and like your your actual first principle stuff going on. Tends to sober people up, and I know that sounds like infertile ground for arts, but I think you need a calm place for arts, as well. And I think this kind of makes it. We need a soundtrack, by the way, because I like Turquoise Sound. She's here. I like her for that. She's starting to put together some interesting Game B beats that I'm liking. I hope she finishes that album soon.
Can you drop a link in the chat?
No, not yet.
Oh,
I did the wrong thing recently. I sent a link to something that she was still working on, and apparently that's a no-no in the musician community. So I've done the wrong thing like that. So we're gonna have to wait for it.
Fair enough. Waiting is good.
Right. I hope she gets it done soon.
But
Because we need a soundtrack. We need an anthem, is what we need.
Well, we also should figure out how to support Turquoise Sound in her work, in the same way we were able to support Jake in his work. I think that one of the things that in this really early Game B world, we have to think about ways to collectively collect resources to fertilize artistic expression. And, I look forward to Turquoise's project, Turquoise Sounds project, and other projects that I'm sure will be coming forth, and figuring out how we as a community can support those people so they can make a living and they can contribute to the soundtrack and the interior decorating and the dancing and shaking of hands and all that, to really turn Game B into a real thing and not just a bunch of logic.
So on this notion of the Stoic and the relationship between the Stoic and art, so one of the senses that I was having as I was trying to listen here is the difference between dialectic and dialogos is the degree to which that there is a third, or however many, an end, the center, the whole is the one, and everyone is listening to that and trying to find a way to speak for it, right? And one of the things that the Stoic does is it creates a protective boundary for that space. It actually creates a spaciousness or a coolness or a quietness that allows the whole to settle and then begin to be able to speak itself. And maybe that's what part of what you're sensing there, Tyson.
Yeah, sorry, Baz, I was just typing like a tapeworm. Tapeworm puts that substance out around it that sort of tricks the body into thinking it's not there. And just kind of dials down the immune response around it. Yeah, that's I reckon the Stoics are that substance. To follow on with Jim's parasitic sort of metaphor, which, all good symbioses start out that way, right?
I had a thought, and Tyson, you were mentioning that I've talked about the plow as one of the turning points. And you're talking now about symbiosis emerging from parasitism. I wouldn't describe the agricultural revolution as the beginning of Game A. It was a major step function in our ability to, in a way you could say it was a major step function in the beginning of the Anthropocene, where we, rather than hunter-gatherer, where we wanted ecosystems, we wanted to now start converting ecosystems to row crops, and our ability to extract calories from the world much faster than a natural environment, grow populations faster, surplus, that whole kind of thing. Obviously, we can look at the Industrial Revolution and oil as being a next major step function. There were a few in there, and then nuclear and digital. But I would take it back to stone tools and fire. I take it to kind of the ability for the capacity for abstraction to increase our predatory capacity faster through tools than the environment could increase its resilience to our predatory capacity. And there's just increasing early hominid anthropology coming out about how much our migration was not, Homo sapien migration was probably not just moving into empty spaces, but killing all the Neanderthals and earlier non-sapien hominids in those places, that extinctionary tribal warfare was key to the actual niche that sapiens were moving into. And that was both abstraction applied to language for coordination and tool making. I might say that was the beginning of game A in a way. And it's just a very long compounding curve, and it has a couple step functions along the way. Because before that, you could say there was rivalry, but the rivalry had bounded symmetries because nothing could increase its rivalrous capacity faster than the other things could increase their response, because mutation was pretty evenly distributed in co-selective pressures. But you could even say, well, fuck, then evolution has a lot of rivalries built in. It's game A, it just had bounded symmetries. I would say like rivalry with unbounded symmetries because of tech is really maybe the game A distinction. And or one way I think about it. And so then that creates these inexorability things, right? If the other guys are doing the more powerful unbounded tech, we have to, or we lose because of the rivalry that was all the way back to pre-human rivalrous selection criteria. But that fucking thing, that inexorability on rivalry driving arms races on exponential curves only has shitty attractors, right? Maybe some long-term stable dystopias and otherwise catastrophes, unless we can figure out how to consciously direct that thing to something other than inexorability. And this is now where art comes in centrally. Like, what is the superstructure? What are the ordinating values? What is beautiful that is worth and that is capable of binding that kind of specifically tech power, and very specifically exponential tech power? So it's real interesting as we get further into this arts question. Like Marvin Harris, following Marx, defined this pretty well with cultural materialism, that infrastructure drives social structure and superstructure. But I would say all of the meta crisis is defined by that direction, right? The social structure and superstructure getting hollowed out by the inexorability on tech competition. And I think the exact opposite is key for game B. How do we actually reify superstructure deeply? What is a good life? What is beautiful? What are the ordinating values? To then have that reify of, for, and by the people social structures that can bind and direct the infrastructure. And that is fundamentally the domain of like arts and religion and spirituality. So it's interesting as I think about it, kind of all of my hope actually lives in our ability to deepen that and have that be the basis for being able to build new social structures that both implement and bind the tech.
I think in terms of tech, I think there's some cultures in the world who jumped straight from flint knapping to forging metals. They skipped steps in their apprenticeship. So if you don't come from a culture that didn't have a few thousand years of ground edge stone tools, then you missed something in your development. I don't really believe this. This is kind of a joke and a provocation, but yeah, so I mean, on our continent here, we had ground edge stone tools for thousands of years before anybody else. So, and there's something you learn over deep time from ground edge tools. If you've ever made a ground edge, rather than, I'm sure everybody's had a go at flint knapping, and I don't know what you use, deer antler or something like that over there, knapping the flint, and that's fun, but it's really immediate and quick. You can make it in a few minutes, whatever you need. But a ground edge tool, it takes weeks, months. It can take a year, to make it just right. It takes a very long time, and it's something you put a lot of effort into, and it's something you expect to last for a couple of generations. It's something you hand down to your kids and your grandkids, that ground edge tool. And I've made a couple of axes and a couple of knives that way, and it's taken years. There is something you learn from that. That's a kind of a more slow tech kind of way. But yeah, I think you're right. The seeds are always there because we have it in our stories here. The stories are here warning against those seeds of narcissism, and everything in our law and everything in our tech is about has always been about holding those things in check and preventing multipolar traps from happening. It's as soon as I learned that concept of multipolar trap from you, I think was the first time I ever heard it. You know, I was looking back through all our old stories, and it's like that's all I could see was people kicking off multipolar traps and then getting smashed for it, you know, and being punished, and that being stopped there. Yeah, very cool. Anyway, I'm just teasing you about the flint napping. Your flint tools are great. They're lovely.
I was noticing in this notion of
Bit primitive.
in this notion of a shift, and maybe that's exactly right, a shift into a kind of a different mode of expression, and at least an upregulation of this notion of art. One of the things that was coming up for me was how important it is that it not be in the intent of translation. Right? So this isn't an effort. It'd be wrong. I'll just say it cleanly. It would be wrong for the ones who are coming to with art as a capacity to imagine what they are doing is trying to take what Daniel said and express it in artistically. That's the wrong move. There's a different move, a right move, which is that there's a thing that just is, and the artist's job is to express it directly and to learn how to become capable of expressing it. And to the degree to which the words and the drawings that have been produced allow a way of tuning to the thing, yeah, to be able to notice that we're in the same place. And then the expression has a consonance with the words. There's a correspondence or a harmony, or more specifically a coherence, but isn't even vaguely trying to use the words to direct it. Then it's what goes beyond, right? That's the point, right? This next stage is actually a going beyond anything that's come so far. So it's not I think it's definitely not marketing, right? It's not a way to express to a broader audience something that has been expressed so far in words, or even to try to capture the ideas and polish them, but rather a unique form of expression of something that is calling for this mode. Yeah, that's the way I would urge it if there's a desire on the part of the artists to begin to play.
Yeah, in art, you never say the thing. And that's, I guess you could argue that the Game B initiation video is not art, because it says the thing. It's instructional. There's discrete sort of, you know, there's knowledge is directly sort of given there and information. But I tell you, I was talking to you. Ever heard of that Findhorn community?
Yeah.
In Scotland. I was talking to them, and they were telling me about a problem they had with an arsonist there. So they got an intentional community, but there was an arsonist in the community at some stage. They had no way of dealing with that. Now, just telling that story, you know, of a woman watching her house burning and trying to figure out how the hell she's going to deal with that in an intentional community where they got their own law. It's like just telling that story, that would be a Game B piece of art. You don't mention Game B at all. You don't mention, you know, the Game A bloody, you know, freeloaders and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
I have a thought on Game B art, and a Game B art project that is somewhere between art and design. There's certainly a rational and consequentialist consideration, but there's also simply a feeling, and maybe this would be the intersection of those. I was talking to Bjarke Ingels about a project that he's working on that is putting together a model for the technosphere of the world that would work to solve the kind of limits of growth problem. And it's not trying to do the enactment of how do we actually get there, but with current tech, what would the energy system, waste management, agriculture, manufacturing, production, city design, transportation, if we could rebuild the world from scratch today, how would we build it that solved those things? Just to basically be able to explore the limits of what is doable and desirable with current tech and have us kind of rethink it. And that's an interesting project. I think there's an art project that would be super fucking interesting to me from this point of view of like environmental psych, ontologic design and environmental psych, the broken windows theorem, just changing, like it's interesting because you cover over the graffiti and you fix the windows and you pick up the trash in an area and crime drops 50%, right? Like simply, and you can say that's because it's signaling there is law here and people care about it. It's also that it's a more beautiful place, so people intrinsically care about it. But the idea that like how criminal people are or the nature of their psyches, what's going on inside of them, and their behavior changes so much by their environment, and then how a cathedral is designed or a mosque is designed to evoke experiences in the people inside. And if we think about if you could apply cathedral design to the entire technosphere, not just how do we make a technosphere that works well with the biosphere, but how do we make a technosphere that works with the social sphere to enlighten the people inside of it as the kind of design consideration, and have people who are thinking from an environmental psych point of view and from an artistic point of view. So it's what is the most beautiful world, but not just limited to a particular lens on aesthetics, but factoring the environmental psych of what is a world that evokes the most beauty in the people. And if we were to just say, if we got to kind of rebuild the world from scratch, we got to redesign it, re-art it, how would we do it? What would it look like if you factored that the entire experience of the behaviors it elicited and how it interacted with all the senses was maximally developmentally enlightening for the people in it? I would just love to see people working on that project.
Yeah, that's what's going to be one of the fun things about the proto-bee movement as we actually start to build communities on the ground, membranes that are bee-ish, but communicate with each other and with Game A, is that I would expect each proto-bee to develop its own aesthetic, right? To essentially find its way towards mutual resonance between the people who live there and the build out of the property. You know, how much of the land goes for agriculture versus beautiful gardens and nature, how much for grazing versus field crops, trees versus shrubs, efficient quote unquote rectilinear buildings versus less efficient but perhaps more beautiful no sharp corners kinds of buildings, etc. And then at the next level up, let's say we have 1,000 proto-bees scattered around in 50 years, 30 years, or 25 years, and someone comes of age, right? So a bee grows up, and they, like a lot of 17-year-olds, they look around and they go, damn, this is some stuffy old shit. This is stuff mom and dad designed, right? Blah! So one could imagine them going on a heart journey and visiting many proto-bees, right? And one of the things that they could be doing is tuning their aesthetics. Does the aesthetics of this proto-bee that I'm visiting for 2 weeks resonate with me, bring me life, bring me joy, make me a bigger person than I was when I got here? And
Game B, Rumspringa.
Yeah, Rumspringa, yes. Absolutely. And when they find the one that is aesthetically correct for them, that may be a big part of the halt of their journey. And so this way, proto-bees by the thousands and tens of thousands are essentially a series of experiments in how does aesthetics and ways of living resonate with the people that live within them. And there is no right answer. I would expect them to be rather different. Of course, there'll be horizontal communications where tricks of the trade that are figured out in one place, like, how do we build a packaged sewage treatment plant that produces high quality compost, right? It'd be great to share those techniques when somebody figures it out. But when it comes to aesthetics and what songs, what kind of dance, what is the schedule of our rituals, those probably differ considerably at each one, and that's a good thing, right? So what I've come to call coherent pluralism is that we have some deep small kernel of coherence that we all agree to, but in terms of the build out of our lived experience, we design it locally and resonantly between the people and the ideas, and we should not expect them to be the same.
You know how I know Game B is working, Jim? Is that none of these participants here, hundreds of people, none of them are listening to us right now. It's all going off in the chat. That's where it's all happening. They're not even listening to us. They got their own things going on in there. That's how I know it's working. And that's how I know it's good.
Oh, well, it's going to be better when we're just completely silent and they're not listening to us. Then it'll be absolutely perfect.
And let's see if people are listening. So let there be light in the Stoa. We'll pivot to some questions. And we'll go with Amy first, our resident art critic here at the Stoa. Amy, if you could unmute yourself.
Hello. So I really enjoyed the film. For me, as a person that's kind of ensconced in art and aesthetics, I kind of look beyond just kind of the visuals and, you know, the script and that sort of thing to like the underlying what is being communicated. I mean, to me, there's a fear-based mentality that kind of defines game A dynamics for me, scarcity, that kind of thing. So to me, when you have a character like the pioneer, whose voice is so anxious throughout the whole film, and I'm not trying to diss Jake's film. I think it was very well done. I'm wondering if that's overly aligning with game A aesthetics, and if game B artistic production needs to find a different kind of aesthetic language that is not kind of aligning with fear, with anxiety, with competitiveness, and etc. I don't know if that question exactly makes sense. And I think, I mean, this is kind of what Daniel was talking about with the idea of not just kind of creating visuals, but actually embodying a new kind of mentality. But I just wanted to make that point and see if you all had any thoughts on it.
Truthfully, I'd like to hear Jake react to that one.
Oh gosh. Oh, thanks, Jim. I don't know. Maybe I don't understand the question so much, but it doesn't feel whole to me to think about a game B as not aligning with that kind of energy. It's funny actually. I submitted this script to Jim the first time, and he was truly shocked and baffled, and then he said, give it another round and just see what you can do with it. And I said, well, how about I just write a completely separate film, a completely different idea. And it was very pathic. It was the opposite. It was it had some extreme kind of existential horror in it. But to me, that's, you know, that's got to be part of game B too, right? I mean, when I said in the beginning, this is a protopian vision, you know, it includes the shittiness of life, right? So.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that I think a key consideration, as remember, we are at the very tiny first baby steps of game B-hood here. We are tiny. Game A is huge and powerful, and all of us are completely saturated in what we've called game A malware, right? There's all kinds of fucked up shit in our heads. And, you know, at least for me, when I watched the film, the pioneer's journey is, you know, a whole lot about her kind of going, you know, going back and forth between the possibility of game A and having possibility of game B and having all this game A malware in her head represented by the parasite. And so, you know, this kind of ugliness struck me at least as appropriate for a person who's just stepping out of the big and strong game A into the tiny, weak little game B.
Any of the other panelists have any thoughts to share on that question?
I was writing something in the chat, so I didn't hear the question.
Jeff, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that we have to think about in terms of conveying these ideas, and the way to do that is a little bit different from the conventional way that we've been telling stories and expressing some of our artwork. I've been talking with Jordan and some of the others here in the room about new modalities of storytelling. You know, instead of the drama of conflict, can there be a drama of reconciliation? The excitement of attempting systemic change rather than wiping out the bad guy, you know, the engagement that can be accomplished with participative narrative. We have technology that allows for you know, dozens or hundreds or tens of thousands of people to contribute to the story, even to be credited for their contribution through things like blockchain. That's really exciting. It affords us new opportunities to convey some of the elements of the Game B narrative. It's really exciting to me. In the past, guys, and I know this is a little Trojan horsey, but some pieces of popular entertainment are responsible really for changing attitudes and conversations about things like race and gender, all in the family. There was a soap opera that came from South America about a maid who was oppressed and who figured out how to educate herself through night school. And millions of women across South America in the late 1960s started to go to night school. You know, Will and Grace started the conversation in the popular sensibility about being gay. We can do this with Game B narratives and Game B components. I'm pledged to. I'm going to tell you right here, I just sold something to the Walt Disney Company, and it is going to be shot through with Game B, you know, and I'm going to Trojan horse that thing right through the mouse's ass. So, you know, let's all try and do that if that's our inclination. There can be some Malcolm X's in the room, but a few.
Trojan horse through the mouse's ass. This is how like Game B language is created. We're creating culture right here.
There you go.
Best meme ever.
Yeah, the graduate student of the future who's unraveling how Game B ended up being the world operating system. That'll turn out to be the pivotal moment in their dissertation.
Did you have any follow-up, share?
No, but I think, Jeff, that you are correct, that I think that that even the most pop cultural kind of, you know, sitcoms and TV shows have the possibility to change culture. I would just love to see artistic product that was less aligned with Game A personality and dynamics, just because I don't find them interesting personally. But thank you so much.
Agreed.
Did something come up about violence there? I think there needs to be violence. I don't think it's a good idea to completely remove violence from your proto B, because it ends up bubbling up. That's how you end up. That's what I told the Findhorn people. It's like I asked them, do you have any combat rituals? Do you have, like, you know, do you all get out the front and punch on for a bit every now and then to let off some steam? You know, do you have any violent games you play, like to work out all those problems? Do you have combat? Do you have anything like that? They said no, and we eschew violence completely. And I'll say, well, that's why every now and then, you know, one of you goes nuts and starts burning everyone's houses down. You need to, humans need that outlet. You got to let off some steam. You got to punch on every now and then, Amy. So yeah, that came up there. I reckon you need a little bit of violence. It's got to be factored in, designed in.
The people who are defending and protecting Game A are going to fight. You know, so there's going to be violence. There's going to be confrontation. It's the reason why we would fight.
That's the sort of the The curious thing about the whole is that it contains everything. Yeah, people asked a question early about things like logic. Is logic part of this game B? Violence. Of course, the answer is yes. The question is, can you use it as a medium of art? Are you actually coming from the place that is the thing from which art comes, and then use the medium as a medium to express? If you are, then you're doing it. And if you're not, then even if you're playing music or dancing, you're not doing it. You're doing propaganda or marketing. Right? So it's the connectivity, the continuity, the being part of the whole in service to the whole to bring more wholeness in each step, in every breath. And so to live artfully is art, is to be an artist. And that is in everything, in every moment, in every breath, in every express, and of course, in every silence.
Tyson, I'm really glad that you brought up the maybe Findorn had a problem because of not having violence. And I'm thinking of art. I grew up watching Star Trek: The Next Generation when I was a kid, and I think as far as art that is visioning that's doing sci-fi that isn't dystopic, it was maybe one of the high watermarks in pop culture. And the fact that they had a Worf character and he needed to go to the holodeck and fight, I thought was a really important thing, because you have the Data character, you have the Deanna Troi character, you have they were kind of elements of the self being archetypally represented, or that's how I took it. And you needed Worf's character, right? But you also needed a holodeck where they could go do war games. Otherwise, it would reemerge. There needs to be a place to experience that. Oh yeah, the multipolar trap actually sucks. We don't want to do that thing. Oh, we have to understand this phenomena. Otherwise, you never get away from cultural decay, that in a few generations, the same shit repeats again because you lost the lessons of the guys who figured out how to deal with the violence that emerged. And so you're stuck in patterns of like 4 generation or however many generation decay cycles, then violence again, if you don't stay connected to the lessons that were learned through violence. And so then, and Jordan said, it's all still there. I would then say fear too, right? All the things that evolved have an evolutionary purpose. And this is, if anything, one of the things I noticed about the film, and I don't think it did this wrong, because we just have to do this a million ways, is in the very beginning, it seems like you've been playing game A, do you want to play game B? I think even thinking about game A to game B as a fairly binary thing ends up being problematic. That doesn't mean it's not useful or instructive to begin with. But when I think about defining it, I'm like, do we get rid of conflict theory? No. Do we get rid of the evolutionary basis of fear? No. Do I want to hold that as a value that drives it into everyone's shadow, so it just unconsciously hijacks them like an arson inside, the way that it happens in a culture? No. Do we get rid of violence? No. Okay, well, if we're still going to have conflict theory, and we can see that there's a way in which even game A, you can say, has been, like, Steven Pinker's not totally wrong, right? The book Positive Sum is not totally wrong. Things have moved towards more collective intelligence and more cooperation in many ways. So in the face of how powerful the effects of our rivalry through warfare and how much our externalities can be, we're moving into a phase where we just have to deal with externalities and rivalry more than we ever did. And so game B to me is kind of a threshold dynamic on those. Yeah.
So as I spent a little bit more time with some Zen Buddhists, I discovered that the notion of pissing people off isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I also noticed that I pissed a lot of people off when I told them that the nomenclature of game A, game B was intended to be a koan. So if you hear game A, game B, and you hear a distinction, you're hearing with game A ears. When you've landed in game B ears, you don't hear it as a dichotomy. It's a koan. That probably just pissed you off. And so it probably landed right.
I think it's like a rhyme scheme for a poem. The ABAB. Yeah. There you go. We're going to get some game ABAB poems happening.
So we're approaching the top of the hour. And it might be good to have just like a go around the panel to close, and maybe I'll ask a question or a prompt. And I was like trying to hold back my my giggles, my stoic giggles, as being the token stoic here at the Stoa when you guys were talking about stoicism. As Pierre Hadot, he considered the Stoics, or they called the Stoics, as artists of life, not artists of reason as modern philosophers. And the idea is viewing life itself as a artwork. And by trying to like earnestly adopt that, it's just, I see everything as art, like making my bed to hosting a Zoom room. So I guess the question to close out is, how are each one of you making your life more artful?
I'll take that one on first. As not that much of a creative artist myself, in fact, not at all. I suppose to the degree that I'm trying to make my life artful is intentionally living far away from big cities, on a farm, growing our own food, cooking our own food, hanging out with regular people, and that sort of stuff. It just feels so much more real than the life used to live as deeply embedded in the matrix of game A. So just physically getting away from all that stuff is in its own way a way of living more artfully.
I just said in the chat that the way you curate yarns on your podcast is art.
Thanks.
Jordan, you're muted.
I was just pointing out Jim's F-bombs are particular, he's a master of the medium. Well, I suppose, whether I like it or not, my approach has been to endeavor to sort of, I imagine that everyone here has noticed that the world has continued to be even more of a shit show than it normally has been. And it seems to just continue to press on that. And the approach that I've taken is to try to continue to metabolize it and to continue to try to drink as much of it in as I can. And then to try to find a way to allow that to continue to become part of me, and then continue to show up in life in spite of that, which is always very close to not quite. And yet every morning there's a waking up and a continuing. So that's the way that I've been living life artfully.
Daniel or Tyson, do you want to close with a share?
Share just a very simple thing, not very philosophically interesting, but I've been writing more poetry again lately, which is something that I go through phases with and really love, and it is very different than writing logical prose in terms of both the feeling and states that it elicits in me, and also even the types of insights. So that's fun.
Just a thought, there's no word for art or music in my language. And doesn't mean it's never been done. It's interesting the kind of art you do and the kind of music you do when you don't have words for those things. It's very unself-conscious when it's not a thing, when it's a process. Yeah. But see, that's getting into linguistic relativism there, which is a whole another Stoa episode.
All right. So I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but Jim, Jordan, Tyson, Daniel, thank you so much for coming today to the Stoa to be on this panel. And Jake and Jeff, thank you for producing and creating this premiere. So here at the Stoa for 2022, we're trying to make art, and we have experimental art with sessions, and we have a few coming up this week. One called the Embodiment Hour with Skylar Brown. Skylar, would you like to unmute yourself and share what that's going to be?
Hi, everyone. This was really, really fun. Thank you so much for this. Yeah, so the embodiment hour is we take a piece of culture, anything from a tweet to a piece of a film, piece of art would be great. Maybe this week to stay with the theme. And then, or an essay or article, like a consilience article, and we take it in together as a group and then notice what's going on for us in an embodied sense. So we look at the feelings, the sensations, the emotions that are arising, and then we share and make sense of the experience at that embodied level together. It's really fun.
Yeah, we watched a clip of Don't Look Up last time, and it was like really a lot of constriction in the body. And then the other session we have is called Social Alchemy, turning socially awkward situations to social art. And AJ Bond and I, it's kind of like MBA schools, they have case studies for business cases. We take social awkward situations that someone brings forth and we try to transmute it into art. And then the session itself attempts to be art, because as the Stoics say, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. You can check that out at thestoa.ca. And Benita Roy and John Vervaeke will be in conversations on a session called The Ecologies of the Self, which is the first time they're in conversation. So that's going to be quite epic. So that being said, everyone, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa today.
And thank you, Peter, again, for pulling this together.